There was a house on the edge of a quiet street where two children grew up sharing everything: a roof, a surname, a mother who meant well, and absolutely nothing else. One of them was chosen. The other one was not. And the worst part, the part that takes years to name, is that neither of them asked for any of it. I want to tell you a story, not a tidy one, not the kind that resolves in a final scene with forgiven glances and hands held across a hospital bed. I mean a real one. The kind that most people don't talk about because it requires them to admit that families can love you and wound you at the same time, and that the two things are not contradictions. This is the story of Maya and her sister Priya, and it starts the way most sibling stories do, not with a fight, but with a feeling that arrived so early in Maya's life that she almost mistook it for a fact about herself. The feeling was this: that she was the extra one. Maya was 7 when she first understood what comparison felt like from the inside. Not the casual kind. Not, "Your sister ate all her vegetables, why won't you?" But the structural kind. The kind built into routines and tones of voice, and which child's drawing ended up on the fridge and which one ended up in a drawer. Priya was 2 years older. She was the one who came first, who arrived in the family when everything was still possible and new and excited. And she was, by any visible measure, easier. She did well in school without visible effort. She charmed every relative without being taught to. She moved through rooms the way some people just do, as if the room had been waiting for them. Maya moved through rooms like she was hoping no one would notice. And here's the thing. Here's the part that the adults in her life never quite understood. It was never about whether Maya was loved. She was loved. She is loved. But love and favoritism are not the same thing. They can live in the same house for decades and never be introduced to each other. What Maya grew up with was not a mother who chose Priya over her in any deliberate, conscious way. It was something subtler and, in some ways, harder to name. A mother who had formed her sense of what a daughter looked like before Maya was born. And Maya, quiet, uncertain, prone to feeling things she didn't know how to express, didn't quite fit that picture. So Priya got the image, and Maya got the space beside it. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are watching this and recognizing it. Not the exact details. Maybe you weren't the younger one. Maybe your family looked nothing like this. But the feeling, the specific quality of being in a room full of people who love you and still feeling somehow beside the point. If you're watching this at the end of a long day and you've been carrying something like that, something quiet and heavy that you've never quite found the right words for, I want you to know that what you're about to hear is for you. Stay with me. Maya grew up and did what a lot of children who feel slightly displaced do. She became excellent at reading rooms, at knowing exactly what a situation needed, at making herself useful in ways that would, she hoped, at some unconscious level, justify her presence. She became, as people called her, the responsible one. Not because she chose it, but because responsibility had been the lane available to her. Priya was the brilliant one, the social one, the one who got celebrated. Maya, by default and by habit, became the one who handled things, who showed up early, who stayed late, who remembered the details so others didn't have to. And Maya, for a long time, believed this was simply who she was. That is the first thing worth naming in this story. The way roles assigned in childhood become identities by adulthood, not because they fit, but because they were the shape of the container you were handed and you grew to fill it. The rivalry between them, and I use that word carefully because Maya never wanted to compete, she wanted to be seen, didn't surface in loud arguments. In their family, the loud was not permitted. Their mother was the kind of woman who handled conflict by refusing to acknowledge it, which meant that the tensions in that house accumulated the way water does behind a dam, quietly, invisibly, until they didn't. What it looked like on the surface was this: two sisters who were polite to each other, who sent birthday messages on time and showed up to the same family events and spoke about each other to relatives in appropriate terms. What it felt like, on Maya's side, at least, was a permanent, low-level grief. The grief of closeness that was never quite available, of reaching, just slightly, toward someone who was never quite reaching back. Not because Priya was unkind, but because Priya had never needed to examine what the dynamic between them had cost Maya. Why would she? It hadn't cost her anything. And that is perhaps the sharpest edge in the sibling favoritism wound. The favored child often has no idea, not out of malice, out of the simple luxury of never having had to look. Okay, I need to slow down here, because I went through that quickly, and I think it's actually one of the most important things I've said so far. The favored child not knowing. This is where the wound gets complicated. Because Maya, over years, over decades, built up something in the space of that silence. First, it was sadness. Then it was a quiet, persistent anger that she didn't have language for because anger at your sister felt shameful. Then it became something closer to distance. A protective glass wall she erected between herself and Priya, invisible and functional, that let her participate in family events without being too exposed. And what do you think happened to the love underneath all of that? It didn't disappear. That is the cruelty of this particular kind of wound. The love doesn't go anywhere. You still love the person. You just love them from behind glass. And after a while, you forget the glass is there. You start to believe that's just how the two of you are. The moment that changed everything, and there is always a moment, there is always the thing that cracks the thing open, came when Maya was 31. Their mother had been diagnosed with something manageable but serious. The kind of thing that reorganizes a family. And in the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged that Maya recognized instantly, with the weary familiarity of someone encountering a road they have driven 1,000 times. Priya became the designated daughter, the one the doctors addressed first, the one whose schedule was consulted, the one whose perspective was sought in every conversation about treatment. Not because she was more qualified, not because she lived closer, but because that had always been the arrangement. Priya in the center, Maya in orbit, and illness had not reshuffled it. If anything, the stress had solidified it. Maya showed up to every appointment, did every admin task, called the insurance, organized the medication, and at a family dinner, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, their mother looked at Priya and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you," in the specific tone of voice that Maya had been hearing since childhood. The tone that meant, "You are irreplaceable." Maya drove home that night and sat in her car for a long time. I don't know where you're watching this. Maybe it's quiet where you are. Maybe you've got one eye on this and one eye on the rest of your evening. But if you've stayed this far, and I notice that you have, I think you're sitting with something. Something this story is touching that has a shape in your life too. That's worth paying attention to. Here is what happened after that night, which is not what you might expect. Maya didn't explode. She didn't finally say the thing she'd been storing since childhood in a tearful confrontation. She went quiet in a different way. A final way. The way that happens when someone has reached the limit of absorbing something they were never supposed to absorb in the first place, and they simply stop. She stopped calling Priya first. She stopped volunteering information about her own life. She stopped showing up early and staying late. And not in anger, not as a strategy, but because the person who had done those things had been, on some level, still hoping. And hope, after 31 years, had finally exhausted itself. And something strange happened in that emptiness. Maya started to hear herself. There is a version of this story where the sister wound is never addressed, where the distance calcifies, where the two women grow older in parallel, polite and hollow, and the story ends in ambiguity that is really just a slow-motion estrangement. That version exists. It happens to real people. I am not going to pretend otherwise, but this is not that version. This is the version where Priya noticed. Not immediately, not even quickly. It took almost 8 months. But something in Maya's retreat, the specific quality of it, the absence where a presence used to be, eventually registered. Priya called one Sunday morning, which she did not typically do, and asked a question she had not asked before. Are you okay? I mean, actually, not the answer you give when I ask how you are. What do you do with a question like that when you've been waiting for it for 24 years? Maya sat with it for a long moment, and then she made the choice, the terrifying, necessary choice, to answer honestly. Not with all of it, not with the accumulated catalog of every slight and silence, but with the thing that was truest at the center. She said, I think I've spent most of my life feeling like I didn't matter as much in this family as you do, and I know that's not your fault. But it's been real, and it's been very lonely. Stop for a second. Imagine saying that sentence, out loud, to your sister, after a lifetime of not saying it. The courage that takes is not small. It is not the courage of a dramatic gesture. It's the quiet courage of refusing to keep protecting someone from the truth about how their life has affected yours. Priya was silent for a long time, and then she said something Maya did not expect. She said, I've known something was wrong for years. I just didn't know what it was or how to ask. And in that sentence, imperfect, late, insufficient, and genuinely meant, a door opened that had been sealed for most of their shared lives. What came after was not a reconciliation scene. Life doesn't produce those. What came after was something messier and more real, a series of conversations, some of them painful, a few of them revelatory. One of them, and about 3 months in, during which Priya said, quietly looking at the table, I think Mum saw me first because I was easier to see, and I don't think she ever meant it to do what it did to you. But I think it did. Maya cried for the first time in that conversation. Not because it fixed anything, but because being witnessed, actually, accurately, by the person whose witnessing mattered most, is a particular kind of relief that very few other things can replicate. Here is the thing about sibling wounds that most people don't talk about. They are not about the sibling. Not really. Or not only. The wound between Maya and Priya was not, at its root, about competition. It was about a child who needed to be seen by her parent and wasn't, not fully, not in the specific and irreplaceable way a child needs, and who made her sibling responsible for that absence in a way the sibling had no power to address. Because Priya couldn't fix it, even if she'd wanted to, even if she'd known. You can't be the remedy for a wound that wasn't created by you. And when we hold our siblings responsible for the attention our parents couldn't give, we place on them a burden that closes the very possibility of closeness we were hoping to create. This is the thing that takes years to understand. That the rival in the sibling rivalry, The one we were silently competing with? The one we measured ourselves against? The one we resented for receiving what we needed was in some profound sense a stand-in, not the original source of the pain. And when we can see that, really see it, not just intellectually acknowledge it, but actually feel it land somewhere honest inside us, something shifts, not immediately, not without grief, but something shifts. If you have been in Maya's place, if you grew up in the shadow of a sibling, if you became the responsible one, or the overlooked one, or the one who learned to need less because needing more was too expensive, here is what I want you to hold. The way you learned to be. The hypervigilance, the self-erasure, the glass wall, the compulsive helpfulness was not weakness. It was intelligence. It was the most creative and adaptive thing a child can do. Find a way to survive in a dynamic they didn't choose and couldn't change. But you are not a child anymore. And the strategies that protected you then are the strategies that are isolating you now. The moment of freedom is not the moment you confront your sibling or your parent or the past. It is the moment you understand that the person you have been protecting against being hurt, that child who needed to be chosen and wasn't, deserves to stop running that survival strategy and start being known by someone, including you. I want to save something for you here. This is the part worth returning to. There is a difference between forgiving someone for what they did to you and forgiving a system for what it produced. Priya did not hurt Maya intentionally, but the structure of their family, the unconscious favoritism, the hierarchy of visibility, did. And Maya had been directing the wound at the most available target. Her sister. When you can separate the person from the system, when you can say, this relationship was shaped by forces neither of us fully controlled, and we are both paying different costs for it, something becomes possible that wasn't before. Not that the cost disappears, but that the resentment stops being a wall between you and someone who, under everything, beneath all of it, you have always still loved. There is a question I keep coming back to that I have not found a clean answer to. What do we owe the siblings who unknowingly benefited from what we were denied? I don't have a single answer. I think it depends on whether they are willing to see it. I think it depends on whether the relationship has anything left in it that is worth the excavation. I think it depends on where you are in the process of understanding that the original wound didn't start with them. But I leave it open, because I think it's the right question to sit with. And I think the answer is different for everyone who is carrying it. Maya and Priya are still in it, still in the long middle of learning to be honest with each other. Some conversations go well. Some go sideways. Their mother is still alive, still the center of gravity, still, without knowing it, occasionally slipping into the old patterns that shaped both of them in the first place. But something is different now. Priya calls on Sundays. Not always, but sometimes. And Maya answers in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. Not behind glass, not from the side of the room, but present. Slightly unguarded, slightly willing to be seen. It is not the ending anyone would write for them. It is better than that. It is real. If you've made it to here, if this story found you at the right moment in the right way, I want you to do something before you scroll away. Don't just let it settle into background feeling. Take the thing that landed hardest, the moment that hit closest to something you've been carrying, and write it in the comments. Not for me, for you, because naming it out loud, even in a comment box, is the first step from something felt to something understood. The question I want to leave you with is this: is there a person in your life, a sibling, a cousin, Someone shaped by the same house you were, who has been carrying a wound that you were too close to see? And if you could ask them one honest question, the way Priya did on that Sunday morning, what would it be? Write it down. You don't have to send it yet, but write it. There is a video on this channel that goes somewhere this one couldn't, into what happens when one person wants reconciliation and the other one isn't ready, into the specific grief of extending a hand that doesn't get taken. If that's the part of your story that feels unfinished, stay. It's there. There was a house on the edge of a quiet street. 2 children, 1 roof, 1 word called family. And somewhere between what was given and what was withheld, between what was said and what was held in silence for 30 years, there was a love that never disappeared, only learned to live behind glass. Maya took the glass down. One Sunday morning, 1 honest sentence. That was where it started. That's where yours can too.